I never really think about it when I start working on a film. It's never that I have a sense of the end.
ഇത് പ്രവേശിക്കാണല്ലോ ഇതിപ്പോൾ ആരയക്കാനാ ഒന്നും കാണുന്നില്ല.
The possibility of cinema and the fact that you don't classify them is actually so liberating and so joyous.
അതിനെൻ്റെ മോനെ രാത്രി വരെ കാത്തിരിക്കേണ്ടി വരും. പക്ഷേ തൽക്കാലത്തേക്ക് ഞാൻ ഈ മേഘത്തിൻ്റെ കയ്യിൽ കുറച്ച് ഉമ്മ കൊടുത്തിട്ടാലോ.
That's what cities do. We have our conversations in whatever language that we do in this larger city, and there are many private conversations that are taking place in this vastly public space.
लोक बोलतात स्वप्नाचं शेर आहे काही तर माया नगरी.
But the sounds don't go away. The public space is still there, and we have to remember that. And then you also hear the traffic. You hear everything still there. But the voices and everything feel as if they are in a very private space.
लगता है ये जगह है ही नहीं, गायब हो जाओ तो किसी को पता भी नहीं चलेगा. हमें पता चलेगा.
I think the thing that fascinates me most about your work is how you fuse the forms, the blurring of the boundary between fiction and non-fiction. So for today's conversation, I want to focus on the form that your films take and the process of arriving at them. Your film, All We Imagine as Light, it opens with the oral testimonies of people living in Mumbai. And these are deeply felt, lived testimonies. And the way these testimonies arrive to us are in the style of an observational, conventional documentary film. But sitting here in the audience, we could see the separation of the form of the two very distinct forms. We are sitting in a fictional world, but here is the opening statement of a film which is coming into the style of a documentary. So could you talk about the impulse to blend the two forms and what kind of an engagement that you expect from the viewer who's watching this film sitting in a fictional world?
It's this fiction non-fiction mix is something that I really love in cinema. It's more liberating than to have the two and not say that they are different in some way than to make these categories. And for me, the juxtaposition of in this, I mean, every film is different, I guess, but with this one, I did the fiction, I mean, the non-fiction and the fiction kind of juxtaposed, and for me, it felt as if the fiction then was more true in a way. It's a very simplistic kind of thing to say, but it just sort of gives some kind of authenticity to the fiction. That's how I felt. That it could actually be that we are shooting, some lives from that non-fiction that we just had. And for me, at least as a viewer, I get more affected by the characters if I am invested in this way with them. So it's also how we shot the fiction afterwards, like with the kind of sound design and the lensing and the kind of light to keep it again in that, which is not very pristine or very kind of course it's constructed. Anybody can see that it's constructed. The very shot of her opening that curtain is so constructed. It's like literally like come into my cinema. But still it has that little quality of the city reflecting on her, which was a documentary shot. Like we took that shot separately and with the reflection, and that's just the building that was being constructed literally, and then to literally juxtapose it on an actor who's doing this very sort of contrived gesture of opening the curtain and looking like this, so I think I just really I'm very, very fascinated by cinema that does both, and it's just something that I'm obsessed with. I wish I had some like profound answer for it, but this is
No, I mean, I'm very curious about your work, and this is all good to hear. And as you rightly said, probably there is more truth in fiction, and I would say that life is stranger than fiction. So what you get in non-fiction is such a strange part, and I think these are very good touchstones to look at form.
very true. I don't think I have the imagination to be wilder than reality. Like the things you see, the things you hear, like, whoa, it won't even come to my mind. So I feel very enriched by nonfiction.
Yeah, I feel the same because, when you go out in the field and you meet people from different walks of life, listen to their stories, it's things that my mind can't imagine either. I think I'm a very poor person to imagine these worlds, but I think maybe I have an ear to go and find these things. So that's why I work in nonfiction, and I devote my life to that.
Yeah,
So, which brings me, to your first film, Night of Knowing Nothing, which was such a brilliantly moving film. I mean,
thank
I
you.
watched it. It was made in a time when a film like that was needed, and I watched it, and I still remember I was so deeply moved by the stories and the sound design, and how everything comes together. Uh, it's an amazing film, but in contrast with your new fiction film, now what begs the question is that in that film you have a device, you have a protagonist who is writing letters, and these letters are fictional letters that probably you or your writer have written, but nowhere in the text of the film, in the body of the film, you let the viewers, the audience know that this is not quote unquote real piece of evidence or information that has come from the real world. So I'm very curious to know this juxtaposition, that what is it that you're trying to do in the non-fiction they're bringing in this fictional element.
Yeah, actually, it was a bit audacious, and I was feeling like when we had a lot of material basically while making this film, and it was, matlab, there was a lot of stuff that we felt very close to because it was all our friends, like we were in FTI, we'd been shooting for so long, we had all these interviews of 2 to 3 hours of people talking, and so it was getting a bit too much. We were very close to it, and then there was all the stuff that we had gotten from other people shooting in different universities, and so it felt a bit overwhelming, the amount of material that we had. It was like 5 years of protests, and besides this also we had more which we not even included in the film. So because unfortunately the time was such, we had a lot of material from those 5 years, so we were thinking how to put it together, because at the end you have to make one 90-minute film. I'm not a very like a filmmaker who can give some information in a chronological way. It's just something that I don't think I'd be very good at. It's just not the kind of cinema that I can make, I feel. So I was thinking of how to kind of deal with all this stuff. And first, and initially, I wanted to do these interviews that I had shot of my friends. I thought that I would take parts of them, like disembodied voices, and keep it through the film and kind of look at this material like that. But then after, like, we moved on to JNU and Jamia and CANRC, and like what we were talking about seemed very perfunctory, and there was no way to kind of connect to that larger thing in some way. So we were thinking how to do it. Then I saw this film, Sans Soleil of Chris Marker. Then I had seen this film before. It's nothing, because it's an archive film, so I was watching it more for like how he had strung together archive and this essay story. Then I said, okay, I will do some reading. So I started reading about like Chris Marker and what. So then I went to the credits and I saw that he has put some credits, but apparently in this interview he says that it's all him. There was no one else who made this film. He didn't go to Japan. He got rushes from somebody and he just made up all this about this person, about this response to this world, about the musician who doesn't exist. So, and all this time I had thought that, it was actually this footage by this gentleman who has shot it. And it's not Chris Marker who has shot it anyway. He's credited someone else. So I was thinking that it didn't matter to me when I saw the film whether it was this person or not. I didn't care. I watched the film as a film. And if it hadn't been this, then I wouldn't have been touched by the film also. If it was telling me that I actually went to Japan and I did all these things, maybe it would have had a very different impact. So I felt a bit like, okay, maybe there is a way to approach nonfiction and not be so constrained by the truth. Because finally, at the end of the day, none of it is true. I mean, it's all very, very subjective. And, like we've all studied nonfiction whenever we studied non-fiction, some of us who did study non-fiction, and you look at like what is a documentary, and you're studying like what's his name, Nanook of the North, and all those essays you have to write about how it was all made up. Then, or even like you watch like a National Geographic documentary where there is this grand voice of saying that, and then the whales going out into the sea, like who is this man and what is, what is all this. So I began to feel more free about what to do and how to do it. So I decided to make up a fictional character and not bother. It doesn't matter. Like, do you feel cheated? Some people do. Some people do come and tell me, like, oh, but I didn't make the distinction. I didn't put it in any documentary sections. I was nominated for both fiction and non fiction. But unfortunately, curators love to put things in boxes. So, oh well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating journey that you have been on from Chris Marker to Nanook of the North, and all this because Chris Marker is one of those very few filmmakers who often puts filmmakers on this journey, and I've been through a similar one through Chris Marker films, and then
Ah,
I came to Nanook of the North, which is it's a fictitious document, it's a fiction film. But even at that time, Robert Flaherty did not present it as a documentary film because there was no categorization in the
it
1920s
was a
of
film.
it was a film. There was no fiction, non-fiction film. So it's a very interesting document to study now, almost 100, more than 100 years from that time.
Yeah.
And but my question is that when we are watching a non-fiction film, there is no suspension of disbelief. We are in a world where we are kind of, also because of the history of documentary films, the way the form has evolved, has been standardized all these years. We feel we assume that we are watching something real. We are watching something true, which it is not true. Now we know. I mean, there's manipulation at every step in making non-fiction film, whether how where you place your camera, how you place your camera, to what happens in the editing. So there is probably no truth in documentary, or there is a kind of an ethereal truth which we don't know. Maybe very few filmmakers get to it. But still, my question, I'll come back to that question of, and I'll try to rephrase it. I would say, should there be some kind of self-reflexivity in nonfiction cinema, so that you gently let the audience, the viewers, know? You may whisper it in their ears. I don't mean that you write text or say that these letters are fictional, but a way of hinting that so that I respect your not suspending your disbelief. So, do you think that works?
Well, I don't know. When I was doing it, I felt that I didn't need to. If I said, I felt that the premise itself was so ridiculous that people would question it, but apparently not. So retrospectively, I've been thinking a lot about this actually, and I was thinking that if I did put a disclaimer, what would it really change? It would make, I think, people think too much about the disclaimer at the end, and people would be think, oh, it's not real, and then that would be the entire conversation rather than the film itself. And so I think that I perhaps wouldn't put a disclaimer still, and I would continue with my ruse.
Yeah, of course, I totally respect that. But I'm not even advocating for a disclaimer. I'm just propagating
Yeah.
an idea that, a gentler way of just letting the audience know. Or on the flip side, I would rephrase my question and say that we don't need to tell the audiences anything, because have we arrived at a time after, since 1922, since Flaherty's time, that the audiences are smart enough to deconstruct a non-fiction film, and so that they can derive their own truth from that. Have we arrived at that point, do you think?
No, that's why I feel conflicted as well, because it's something that I am still trying to figure out, because I still get audiences that are really upset later on, like even 2 months later will write to me and say, what was this? so so I don't know. It's something that I'm also figuring out, and like you do, and you see, and you see how much you can get, like what you gain from this, from the formalistic thing about how to do it. And it's like another person told me recently, and she was very very upset with me about this. She was a woman here in New York, and she was very angry. Then I said that, like, okay, what she said, but it was also very boring, your movie, and the only thing that kept me awake was to know what happened to Elle. So I said, then it worked for you because otherwise you would have gone to sleep throughout. You didn't care what's happening in India. You were invested in the story. And then she really thought about it and but she still was quite upset and felt cheated and walked away in a huff, but with a little less of a huff. So I don't know, like I'm thinking about it a lot, but I still don't feel like, I think that in the world that we live in, everything is so manipulated that it's kind of naive to think that it's not. And I don't know, I'm not judging anyone, but I still feel like
No,
everything is so contrived.
it is, and it's a very difficult world, this post-truth world where there is something called an alternative fact. I don't know what did you mean by saying that, but there is something like that. So
Yeah, we are
that
basically
kind of
living in a Rashomon film.
true, and that's the world we inhabit now.
Yeah.
But that kind of makes you wonder and think that should we, as non-fiction filmmakers, huddle down and try to respect that whatever modicum of respect for truth that we have left in non-fiction film, if we use truth to be as malleable as a poetic device, then what is the difference between us and, let's say, uh, a MAGA supporter, or the people with alternative truths? I mean,
Yeah.
they're also bending the truth to their own ends, and we as filmmakers are probably going to do that for artistic purposes. So where is the distinction then? And then what happens to the observable facts? Films that go dig out, investigate, and find some kind of new perspective, and I hate to say the word new truth, but new kind of fact somewhere. So how do we preserve that?
I think it has a lot to do with how you present the film, perhaps. Like, one thing that I kind of found some comfort in to negotiate this, what you're saying, because I really did struggle with it a lot, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing at some points with this. But to call it, like, nowadays there are other terms for what documentary, and to have creative documentary and hybrid fiction, non-fiction. Now, because apparently now we cannot divide cinema into fiction and non-fiction. It needs to have layers of that. It is not it is not this or that. It is this with a spoon of this, with two chammach of that. So we need to clearly tell the audience that it's hybrid in some way, or that it is a mixture of fiction and non-fiction, that it is perhaps not entirely true. But in a sense, what is true? I mean, it is true that we went through this time. It is true that perhaps somebody had these feelings. It could be true, and I know it's not, but it very well could be. And I don't know, does it really matter? Is what I am confronted with. But yeah, I get your point, and I also feel very, like, not sure of how to deal with this conflict in my mind. But yeah, this kind of classification being a little bit more complex, I think, helps, perhaps.
So you would advocate for categorization and classification, or would you say that we don't need any kind of categorization and there is something called cinema and it constitutes everything?
I think human beings like to be more precise, unfortunately. So to satisfy everybody's need to classify, maybe we should be like, ideally, yeah, it should be not there. Film is film. Ideally, that should be the answer. But I think that people will never be satisfied with that. So let's be as specific. Like, it is
Yeah,
1/3 hybrid, 2/3.
yeah, that's very interesting.
It's like a recipe, like 2 chammach ye
Yeah.
dala, 3 chammach we put this, 4 is this.
No, that's a very interesting. I think we could come up with something like that because, I mean, of course, the categorization that we have now is not working, and there's a lot of flux in non-fiction evolution of the form, and which is all very fascinating. It's amazing how the form is blooming organically. But I'm also of the opinion that we need some kind of categorization so that, and as you said, we human beings are fond of categorizing things. We have categorized almost everything that we know in the knowable universe into small little chunks, and that's how we make sense of the world. That's how we find order in the utter chaos that is in the world and in the universe all around us. So I think that dissolving all the forms is probably not the answer, and maybe, as you say, just making these fine distinctions might help. and then one day it might lead to the declassification of the entire thing, because the entire structure might break down, because it's just, if it goes to such a minutia of categorization. So yeah,
True, true.
I kind of agree with that. So coming to new film All We Imagine Is Light, and I noticed at various points in the film you break away from the realism and verisimilitude that you have very carefully constructed. And I'm reminded of the scene where the prospective bridegrooms are shown on the screen, and it's a beautiful scene between these two young lovers, and you cut to the black screen and the photographs of these grooms, and not just that, you overlay with non-diegetic conversation of these prospective grooms. So, it had a very strange kind of an effect while watching. For me, I found that aside very interesting. It was a quirky aside that, as if I was led into a corner and let a secret. But at the same time, I didn't want to be pulled out of the realism. So I'm just wondering that what kind of experience that you want the audiences to have when you break into these rivulets from the stream of realism.
Yeah, for me, it was exactly that attracted me to it, because I was thinking a lot about privacy in public space. And this sort of like, because the way I've shot that sequence also in Muhammad Ali Road is that we shot it as a documentary. We didn't have a crew. It was just Riku, myself, and the two actors walking around, and we were just hanging out with our DSLR camera, hiding behind kebab shops and taking these videos of them, and they were just in character the whole time. So it was Muhammad Ali Road. It was literally like, those people are background actors, are not actors. The sound is as it is, and we were going to eat the kebabs in the shot after the shot was finished. So all that particular scene, I felt to kind of carve out a sense of privacy, because finally at the end of the day, our conversations in, like, that's what cities do. It's, we have our conversations in whatever language that we do in this larger city, and there are many private conversations that are taking place in this vastly public space, and that is our feeling of privacy. And then we can quickly go into the worlds of our phones, which is another sort of layer of just uh, grabbing space of just for the two of us, let's say. And so the two of them, and for me that, but the sounds don't go away. The public space is still there, and we have to remember that. And then you also hear the traffic, you hear everything still there, but the voices and everything feel as if they are in a very private space. And to use sound in this public and private way, I think is a very, for me at least, a very city thing. Because like, for like, to break into Malayalam also, how many people probably there speak Malayalam? Not that many. So that also creates a sense of privacy. Yeah, so I think privacy is such a privilege in cities, that we find all these ways to kind of grab it. And I wanted also to have that quality in the film. Like, there's another scene also where you see the traveling shot from the window, and Anu is telling about crystal nurse, where there is a man who exposes himself to crystal nurse, but you're seeing the city, but her voice is so soft that there's no way that it's kind of part of that city. She's definitely telling somebody close by. And those kind of like levels and registers of voice and acting, of I'm talking like this to you just so privately, and I wanted to tell you something. But or me be speaking, in this way, and having it like this, can be such small little things that in cinema we can do to kind of talk about the politics of space and just city life and lovers.
I mean, I totally got that sense watching that scene. It felt like a very quirky aside. But the thing that I was trying to comment upon is, I think, the way you have liberated yourself as a filmmaker so that you can break the form uh, to go into these small little rivulets and come
Yeah.
back to it, which I think is a very brave choice. Not many filmmakers could do that. So I just trying to arrive at
Yeah.
that liberation that you have had, and how did you arrive at that?
That's a good question, because it was a long time. Like, in when I was in FTI, when I was a student, it started actually because we had to write a paper which was comparing Jean Rouch's Moi Noir and the film of Godard, Breathless. So we had to look at both these films, which actually did that. They were both fiction, non-fiction kind of, because Jean Rouch shot, as we all know, that shot the film and then asked the people in the film to do commentary on whatever they saw as movie stars. And in the meanwhile, there's Godard who shot this film, but shot it with the actors looking into camera sometimes. Shot the city as non-fiction. So I had a very great professor who thought that this would be a good idea for students to do, and actually it was, because if you just analyze those two films and the approaches to them, you just see that the kind of fiction non-fiction inverse that is taking place, but is so effective. And it's so many filmmakers have done this. Like if you watch Tuki Buki, it's a great film of fantasy, reality, fiction, and documentary as well. This was a kind of starting point for me to kind of I had this sort of moment of, oh, okay, I can sort of do whatever, and people have done it. Not I'm not nobody new to be doing this. People have been doing it for since the beginning of cinema, and I kind of got really obsessed with this idea. I have to say, it was like my biggest passion when I was a student. And the next study I had to do was like a director study, and I chose to do it on a director called Jose Luis Gurin. And Jose Luis Gurin is another one who is obsessed with fiction, non-fiction, and made two films 10 years apart. One which is an archive film called Trains of Shadows, where he's using a gentleman's private archive to investigate his death. And 10 years later, he made In the City of Sylvia, where he's just following this woman around, trying to kind of find out if she is Sylvia. Uh, so it's both investigative, but in a very different way. And again, like In the City of Sylvia, it's like documentary of this city, while in the other one, it is excavating the archives and creating this world. But the films are actually the same.
Mhm. Yeah.
And this fascinated me. Like I was completely obsessed with this idea of the possibility of cinema, and how the fact that you don't classify them is actually so liberating and so joyous. At that finally I did my thesis again on this, and it was called The Cinema of In Between, it was on Miguel Gomes, a Pichat Pong's Mysterious Object at Noon, and this artist called Omar Fast, who literally like completely pushes the boundary of fiction non-fiction. And it was a lot of padhai that I'm a very nerdy person and I love cinema, so I really delved into this in a very fundamental way, and really enjoyed the rabbit hole that I went into, and applied it to my own work finally.
It truly is a rabbit hole. The moment I kind of get into that, it leads you into all kind of different spaces that you have never been to. And through one of my discoveries was Jean Rouch. I did not study him in college, but I found his cinema and I was like, yeah, probably this speaks to me, which is self-reflexivity. And
It
then I
is.
thought maybe this is what I need to do, and then I could liberate my own mind and be free and do whatever. But this
Yeah.
niggling question of whispering to the audience, and I think self-reflexivity to me answers that question. So for me, Chris Marker and Jean Rouch, these are the two people who probably define my worldview of nonfiction now and how I want to approach it. So, yeah, I mean, it is a rabbit hole, and once you go down, you don't know where you will be let out. And I think that's the most fascinating part of nonfiction, because I don't know that in fiction you still have that ability to be let out into a different world altogether. I mean, yes, in a made up world of superheroes, that's true. But with the form, I don't know if that plasticity still exists. What do you think about that?
uh, Firstly, I just want to, yeah, you're right. The self-reflexivity part is the most important in this, and it was kind of it is what gives the possibility of that self-reflection. And I think to put yourself in the film as the maker is in some way important, because otherwise you are, I don't want to have this position of I am looking at, but as Trin Min Ha says, I am nearby. I am sitting nearby this footage. I am sitting here and I'm also there, but I am not commenting on it, because who am I to comment? So I don't know. I think that's a really good point that you make about the self-reflexivity.
This point about I'm here, I think it's a very spiritual way of attempting cinema because it's very conscious. It's like in the moment, in the now cinema, which is also very difficult to make, you know. Probably nonfiction is the only vehicle on which you can go down this road and say, I'm in the now. And
Yeah.
I don't know many filmmakers who can achieve that because it's really into a different realm. It's a very spiritual experience for the maker, and hopefully it translates for the audiences as well. So the way these filmmakers lead us down the rabbit hole of what nonfiction could be is quite fascinating in that sense, and to make these discoveries for us. But I was also quite taken by sense of temporality in your film, All That We Imagine as Light. I mean, obviously, there are two cinematic times working in the film. One is in the urban scape, which is relentless, and then when we come to the village, it's a languid, beautiful, slow time, cinematic time that we find ourselves in. So, can you talk about? I mean, I feel that filmmakers have this great power, where in whose hands time is so malleable. So, can you talk about that? And if you think that any other art forms, any other artist working in any other art form has similar kind of powers over time, maybe music. I don't
Yeah,
know
in
since I
music,
don't.
I guess. Yeah, I
So,
agree.
can you talk about that temporality in the context of your film, and how did you structure it?
Yeah, it's such a privilege in film to be working with time. And I got very obsessed with the idea of having two different feelings of time, the kind of a subjectivity of time, which is basically what you're doing, while writing a scene, or, to do editing. You're trying to understand what is the feeling of time you want to give to the audience. For paintings, when people look at, that was the kind of limitation of artists with paintings, that how much time do you want the viewer to look at a painting, and that was pretty much what they were struggling with their whole lives. But we have this, so okay, let's feel time differently. And I was also kind of thinking about the perception that time has on your kind of way that you think. And so I wanted to do the first part of the film, which is over many days, because the characters in the film are working, and there is like this kind of routine, and you have to go, and it takes 2 hours by the train, and there is the 9 hour 10 hour shift. And so there is no kind of autonomy over your time. It's a capitalistic idea of time, which is not your own. But when you are taking a day off, that is perhaps the time that you have, your time. And but I was also thinking that, when if these women actually did get a leave, they would probably have to go back to their hometown, because that's what you do if you live in a different city. If you get leave, you go back for that vacation to see your parents and your family, and that is what is expected of you. And that is a different, again, kind of burden on your time. But if they had to take a forced holiday, what would that feeling of time be? Especially in a place where there is no network, it's really in the back of beyond. What would the feeling of time do to you? And I wanted to have this. And the final scene in the film where she's cleaning that drowned man, it's a 10-minute long scene. There is no other scene in the film that is that long. And it really slows down. And some people might find it boring. But I try to create that mystery a bit, so that again it's not felt the 10 minutes. Yeah, so all these things I was kind of very theoretically thinking about, but also to kind of feel in some way time, the presence of time.
So I do want to come to the scene of the drowning man because I found it quite fascinating because it was suddenly this magic realist element thrown into this film, and you don't know if what is happening is real, true, or not. And again, this whole meta commentary about fiction, non-fiction in that whole scene that you bring in. And at the same time, I was quite taken by the trope of the sand that you use, which becomes such an evocative metaphor of something that is ungraspable. So can you talk about bringing that 10-minute long scene into that film, which is a whole different style? I know you are a liberated filmmaker, you could do anything in the form, but how did you arrive at this one thing in a 10-minute long scene? And it works so well because sometimes, honestly, when I watched the scene for the first time, I didn't get it. In the second watching, I was like, oh, this is what the scene is doing. And so yes, it's quite a meta scene, quite an intellectual scene. So if you can speak about the process of getting that scene into the film.
It's funny that you think it's an intellectual scene because for me it's a very visceral scene. It's a very sensual, sexy scene. It's a scene about like touching and something very, yeah. So it's just a. I never think of the scene with my mind really, and I always think of it really as being in the position of Prabha as somebody actually reaching out and touching me. So yeah, that's the kind of feeling I wanted to have, and I wanted to kind of go from this super like neo-realistic film to go into something that is so kind of out of this world. Finally, with wiping body thing, and I felt that the film kind of slowly goes there with the cave and everything, where it's slowly that feeling of reality I was trying to get away from. And even the way the scenes are shot, it's much tighter in some of the shots than it's ever been in the first half. There is a lot of kind of close-ups of the eyes and the body and the nipples and the goosebumps and all these kind of things before that I wanted to kind of say that we are looking like a petri dish that that is going wide, and then finally into the grain of sand. That you actually see that grain of sand, and that was the kind of intellectual thought process. But for me, it was Prabha having the feeling of touch. The camera also then being so close that it's as if we are touching each other. That's just how I thought about it. I was also thinking that this fable kind of way would be a way for, because now this woman doesn't talk only through the film, like she doesn't express her feelings only. Now what will she do? So I was, what would be the natural way for her that she would be able to deal with this shit in her my mind? So for me it was kind of the natural choice that it would be something that she vomits out, literally breathes life into a man, because, and brings him to life to make him say whatever she wanted to hear and then reject him still. So that was the kind of trajectory I wanted for that.
Yeah, yeah. I think I can connect all the dots that you mentioned, and it's quite evident in the film. Which brings me to Prabha and that scene with the rice cooker. I mean, of course, it's an unforgettable image in the film, and I think that is one object that leaves a lasting impression on you when you watch this film. So I was very curious about how do you find, you sort of imbue some kind of an idea, a life into this inanimate object. And what was the impulse to do that, to create a scene which is so surreal?
I was thinking about like this husband, this gift, something that he sends her, and for some reason the this kitchen appliance felt like it embodied a lot of layered things, and that for me was a bit intellectual, which was that it kind of is this sense of desire of of a woman who is to take care of her large family, and that's why she would need a rice cooker. It's how like these things are advertised to women quite often. And for me then the mixture of the patriarchy that is so prevalent in our country and the kind of consumeristic capitalistic ideas that feed off that and push it in our faces all the time with things like kitchen appliances or like fortune cooking oil. And it's not like the lady will have more time so she will go to work. No, she will have more time to like play with her children. So those are the kind of ideas that are propagated, and these two mechanisms feed so effortlessly and kind of become the parasite of our minds. So I was thinking a lot about these things in a very theoretical way, I guess. So I felt that he could send her a rice cooker, but it is not theoretical. It is about affection. It is about all these things. So then it just felt somewhere, how can she express these feelings that she doesn't even know she has, except to hug this inanimate object, which is in some sense is also pitiful for her to do that.
I think for me, it works on both the planes. It's quite intellectual and it's also something ineffable, and it responds to both those urges of the viewer. What really struck to me when you were answering this question was when you're talking about is the idea of capitalism that you spoke a few minutes before, and it is kind of translating into this inanimate object. And also, it ties very well with the idea of time that your film talks about. And time is also colonized by the capitalistic forces in this huge city. And the further away you move from that center, a certain kind of decolonization of time happens. And
Absolutely.
I find that quite fascinating, and that is what I think the temporality of your film does. And it is an intellectual thought, but it works as a piece of film on the screen as well. But we read films, we want to see things into the film that the filmmaker thought of or didn't think of. That's what the multiple readings of any kind of text bring to us. So I,
Yeah.
I think that's the temporality I see in your film, and I find it quite fascinating and engaging as well. Um, uh, Speaking of which, I think we are close to time. I won't take much of your time, but I am very curious to know what kind of hybridity, what kind of liberation are you dreaming up now? Where will you take us next in your dreams?
I never really think about it when I start working on a film. It's never that I have a sense of the end. I never know how it's going to go. Like a lot of this film, also, the script that was written, it didn't have all these flights of fancy. I was just doing it in the preparation. Like I met some girls who told me about this old man who exposed himself. And the way they told the story was so secretive that I was like, oh, this is a great way of telling this story. And was not going to be in the film. So that's what reality gives a lot more than the fiction can ever do. And for me, the reality also gives the form to me. So it's really about it's then that is where the what conclusion I can draw is that the process of non-fiction is what is exciting. It is that you have the reality and then you come back and you deal with it and you sort of find a way to put it in the cinema. And that for me is the where the answers come to the reaching of the end of the film. So I will write a script, but finally it is in the pre-production where I'm meeting people. I do a lot of interviews, I roam about a lot, I shoot a lot of random things, and I shamelessly put it in the film also. Like I don't care if the image is not good, if it's a weird photo that's coming in the middle. Now I'm obsessed with selfies as a form of self-expression, and I really want to incorporate selfies and reels in the next film, because I think it's a great way that people are kind of grabbing the visual medium and kind of expressing themselves and saying a big fuck you to the world. And uh, I love that. I think that Instagram stories are great documentary films.
Yeah, they indeed are. I mean, just incidentally, yesterday I spent whole day looking at Snapchat reels. It was my first day on the platform, and I was like, is this what is engrossing people around the globe? And I had to delete the app by the end of the day because I thought that I lose my mind and my eyes and whatever brain cells I have. But that is where the world is, and I
Yeah.
think it's a very fascinating concept that you are engaging in and that you are going to explore. It sounds amazing. I'm sure it will be a great film, and we cannot wait
Oh,
for it. So,
thank
and
you.
also, it's a wonderful conclusion to this conversation. The way you wrapped it up, I think I need not say anything more to that. So thank you so much, Payal. It was a
Thank
delight
you.
talking to you, and I enjoyed every
It
bit of
really was nice talking to you. Can I use this line of decolonization of time? I really like it.
it. Please use
Thank you.
it. I must have also stolen it from somewhere. So we must use
Yeah,
it with
actually,
grace.
I saw it in this film of. Now that you say it, it made me think about William Kentridge has done this thing on time, and
Yeah, yeah,
he says this. It's so nice. Thank you. I
yes.
appreciate
Maybe I
that.
stole from Kentridge. I don't know. He's one of my favorite artists. So
Mine too.
yeah, that's great. We can bond over that. So really fascinating talking to you, Payal, and
Thank you.
hope to speak to you soon again. All right. Thank you.
Bye.